And remember that pulling out of the U.S. from the Paris Accord is our top story this afternoon, and it's also the basis of our Twitter poll. And I'll be taking a look at some of your responses before we wind up the show. And we're asking you, do you think the withdrawal of the United States will affect the global campaign on climate change? Well, that is our Twitter poll. Would like to hear what you have to say. Do you think the withdrawal of the United States will affect the global campaign on climate change? Hashtag Worldview or at Betty M. Kialo is what you can use to communicate with me and tell me what you think. I'd love to know. All right, so let's get straight into our discussion. Joining me right now in studio is Abel Ayieyo from the Center of African Progress. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
He's also an international relations expert, so he's going to be talking to us about this move by Trump. So there are a couple of leaders who say that it was not a surprise that Trump actually pulled out. Was it a surprise to you?
No, it wasn't, because Trump was elected, of course, as a conservative on a very conservative platform. And of course, you know, conservatives push for what we call isolation of the U.S. And they push for what we call traditional sources of energy like oil and coal. So they don't care about climate change. They call it hoax, like it's fake.
Yeah.
So I'm not shocked. It was bound to happen at some point. The speed with which it's happened now is the shocking thing. Should have taken a while.
But seriously, they are calling it a hoax. But I mean, there are scientists, even from the United States, who've been talking about this thing for such a long time. You mean they just disregarded that and they're going forward with what they think is right? Yeah,
you know, the problem with the Republican Party has been the money. The money comes from the conservatives who have a lot of investments in oil and coal and all that. So they feel threatened by what we call alternative or renewable energies like solar, talk about wind. They don't want that. So the more they focus on oil, the more they keep on getting the money, which means the best way to do it is to support a Republican government, which in turn has to do what they want. So I don't think Trump believes that climate change is a hoax. He actually believes it's taking place. And we can see global warming, we can see its consequences.
Yes.
So, but he has to dance to the tune of the guys who fund the party.
All right, and that brings me to a question that I've seen quite a number of people asking. When Trump, you know, when we hear he's made certain decisions, is it him or are there people working behind him? Because he comes across as a very erratic kind of leader. So is it him really, or like you mentioned, that people working behind?
No, what has been happening is at some point, you know, it was a one-man show. Like he could make decisions on his own and then expect you guys to just back him up.
Yeah.
But I think as time has progressed, he's begun with consulting. Now the problem is the guys he listens to have a similar mindset. And they always get scared of challenging him and questioning the kind of decisions he's making. So he consults, but you see now he goes to the same guys who have a similar mindset.
Okay.
So he does not get a variety of ideas.
If he got a variety of ideas, do you think he would really listen to it? Or is it Americafest all the way?
Now, you see, even if you're putting the U.S. first, you couldn't do what he did.
Yeah.
So I think they've gotten it all wrong at the end of the day, because what they've done is to seed the ground. They've created a lot of space for China to move in and show the way. So guys will be talking about China spearheading the path towards renewable energy, you know, dealing with climate change and all that. So the U.S. has given up leadership in the global stage to China.
What do you think, and even talking about China, I mean, China for a long time was not committed to you know, ending global warming or reducing this emission of gases.
Yeah.
And then finally they signed this agreement. So what is now the place of China in this whole crusade? Now,
the reason as why China was not committed towards the idea of fighting for, you know, a cleaner and a greener atmosphere environment was lack of evidence. But, you know, over a very short period of time, the industries in China generated so much waste into the atmosphere until you could not see the Chinese sky. So they got to accept it's happening. So we have to do what? Move with speed. And they found a very willing partner in Obama as a U.S. president.
Right.
So they were willing to, you know, partner with the U.S. and the rest of the global powers and, you know, call for reduced emission of greenhouse gases. But you see now, Trump has capitulated to the conservatives and pulled the U.S. out of that.
Right.
So now the space is left for the Chinese to move in and show leadership.
And will they?
They will. I think the Chinese are very excited. There is now some space. They're not going to have any competition from the U.S.
Okay.
So anyone who talks about fighting for a better environment will be looking to China.
To China, which is the biggest emitter, isn't it ironical?
Exactly. And
okay.
Yes. Yeah, and of course now that is what the Russians wanted. That is the basis on which they meddled with the U.S. election to get Trump making the kind of
Is
decisions
that
we're seeing.
so?
We're seeing a waning U.S. Trump does not have any influence as a U.S. president. In the G7 summit, he was just another president. And like in the past, when, a U.S. president could show up and
Yes,
then
yes.
you feel the weight of the money in the room.
Exactly.
So it's not happening. Yeah.
Interesting.
You remember the handshake?
The handshake. Everybody is talking about the handshake.
Yes.
Moving on to another aspect. So what does the U.S. pulling out, what does this say in regards to this whole campaign against global warming?
I don't think it's a lost battle. Of course, we expect the U.S. to show leadership on major issues like terrorism and all that. But I think now, because of the emergence of China as a superpower, we're not going to see it's not a lost battle. And the anti-Trump coalition that is going to involve the Europeans, talk about the Britons, French, and all that, will still come out and champion the issue of making the world a better place in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
All
So
right.
it's not a lost battle. Yeah.
But the UN has come out already very fast to say that they're looking at the temperature rising by 0.3 already.
Yes. So the problem is, of course, as the US as a superpower, it's got so much in terms of industry. And when they disregard all those regulations in the pact, it means they're going to increase the emissions, which means, of course, we move back a couple of steps.
Steps back.
So what I expect is China to, of course, lead the rest of the countries in pushing other countries to join in reducing the emissions so as to to create space for what's going to happen in the US.
All right.
And of course, I expect a lot of opposition from so many quarters in the US and a possible impeachment of Trump.
Really? But people have been waiting for this impeachment. It has never
That is
happened.
because the FBI investigation is not done yet.
Okay.
Yes.
Interesting. We'll be here to discuss if that happens. All right, coming back home, something great happened in the last couple of days. The SGR was finally flagged off.
Yes.
And, there was a lot of positivity in the air that, finally we have something that you can call a historic move that was done by the Jubilee administration. Where will this put Kenya in the okay, let's start with East Africa map.
Well, for a long time now, Kenya has been, I think, the center of economic development in not just East Africa, I think Eastern Africa, when you consider the 6 countries. So what it does is to push it far ahead of Tanzania, Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda, and all that. So it's not a big deal. We still retain Now, when we're talking about regional economic issues, we still maintain our position as an economic superpower within the region, of course. Now, politically speaking, that is a big addition for the president, who is approaching an election, which, of course, was going to be very tough. Now, around 6-7 months ago, what we were talking about is corruption that was related to the project. But, Kenyans are used to projects being initiated and they're not completed. They become white elephants. Now, for once, a project which was tainted by corruption at some point has actually been completed and flagged. It's now happening. And I think the spectacle was good for political points.
The spectacle.
Yes, it was very good. And I think in as much as the opposition might work very hard to undermine it and stuff, Kenyans are seeing something that is happening.
But even the opposition has come out to say that they actually fully support, the project, and they're just raising questions which, was at some point a point of discussion countrywide about just how much it costed the country. Yeah,
of course, those questions were legitimate, and of course, it's the work of Kenyans and even the opposition to raise questions when it comes to spending the money. But again, the comparison which was being drawn between the Kenyan railway and the Ethiopian one was misplaced, because you realize we have around 33 terminal points within the Nairobi-Mombasa connection. You go to Ethiopia, you'll find like 4 of them, a very, very small number. So every single terminus comes with a cost.
Okay.
So, of course, money most likely got stolen. I'm not very sure about that. But I don't think it's as high as some fellows could want us to believe.
Not as high as other scandals that we've seen.
Yeah.
That's maybe.
And I like the idea that the opposition came in and said it's a good project. And the former Prime Minister was willing to say, actually, the coalition government, which he was part of, initiated the project. So it's good.
All right.
Yeah.
Moving on to another issue, which is the EILA, looking at the broader perspective of the East Africa. EILA is supposed to be dissolved, and we're supposed to have new nominees, being listed by Monday.
Yes.
Kenya, all the other countries have done that, presented their nominees. Kenya hasn't. Why is that? Is it the politics of Kalonzo's son and Oburu Odinga that have lagged this thing behind, or are there any other issues at play?
I think the kind of problems we're seeing in Kenya when it comes to selection of nominees to EILA is symptomatic of what we call a very competitive democracy. Of course, Kenya is doing very well. Guys question processes, and you can't just pick someone and send them there and expect guys to clap. Yeah, so that is why when Musyoka proposed to the Sun, guys questioned that. So that kind of questioning and debate leads to a delay. In places like Uganda, Tanzania, that kind of questioning is not there. That is why it's always very quick to send the members to the assembly. So I think we're okay. The kind of debate that is going on about Kennedy Musyoka and even Oburu Odinga who later withdrew is healthy. We need to question that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Abel Ayieyo, for your insights this afternoon. We'll see you again next week, and happy weekend.
Happy weekend to you too.
Thank you very much. Abel Ayieyo is from the Center for African Progress and also an international relations expert. So we want to wind things up here, but we want to take a look at our Twitter poll in which we had asked you if you think that the withdrawal of the United States will have an effect on the global campaign on climate change. Well, that has been our top story this afternoon, and I'll be looking for some comments here. First things first, as you can see there, 63% of you say yes, that indeed the withdrawal of the US will have an effect on the global campaign on climate change. Thank you very much for your insights. And then we have 37% saying no, that will not have any impact or any consequence on that. We appreciate your views and, of course, for watching the show. Thank you very much for watching the show. All right. Fine, so this is where we will leave it at. It has been Worldview. We appreciate your company. I'll see you again later on Friday briefing at 9 p.m. And